So hello everybody and welcome to the third part of this webinar series. My name is Maren Dai. I'm the project manager of the European Theatre Lab, Ramagos Digital, and this is Amy Cordell, our communications consultant. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to this third part, where it is about nuts and bolts, how to run a successful social media campaign. Amy will just tell us what we can expect today.
Okay, thank you, Maren. And yeah, thank you for everybody for joining us today. As Maren said, this is the last webinar in a three-part series. And we've already looked at topics like how to tell stories on social media, where do you get ideas, what are the typical channels you should use. And today we're going to be a little more practical and look at some real tools to help things actually get off the ground. So now I'm going to go into the presentation. So bear with us, please, and we'll just take a quick look. One moment. Great. Yeah, so as I said, this is the third in a three-part series, and in the first webinar, we did discuss mainly typical channels you can use, and then in the second part, it was all about creativity. The goal of the whole series is to create a foundation for the project European Theatre Lab. For that, what we want to do is take theatre communicators, provide training so that the theatre communicators can use these new tools to reach new audiences. One idea is to bring the creativity that's on the stage into social media as well. And we also want to discuss organizational aspects with communicators. So now the question is, okay, what am I supposed to do now? How am I actually supposed to make this happen? As we said, our goal for the series is for you to become an in-house expert on social media, especially these newer channels. But there are day-to-day obstacles that prevent that. So the question is, okay, how do we get beyond these? How can we still have these ideas and have the internal resources necessary to actually execute them? Well, here's one solution. Let's ask Arnold what Arnold says. Okay, just do it. It's sadly not that simple. That brings us to today's agenda. What we want to do is look at the day-to-day work in theaters. So for example, how you coordinate with other departments. Okay, how do you create an editorial calendar? How do you do things like community management? The whole goal of social media is, after all, to build a community, especially to engage with your audience on social media. So the question is, okay, how do we manage them once we've built that audience? We'll also discuss crisis communications at that point. Another thing is also to talk about guidelines, so that guidelines for internal use of social media, so that your coworkers and other staff in the theaters will understand what they really, how they can contribute. And then finally, we'll also look at some tools, some classic social media management tools that will help simplify processes, make things more efficient, and basically save time in the end so that you can spend time working on fun, creative projects. Okay. First, let's look at the hurdles. These hurdles are basically typical in every organization. Most people struggle with time, money, maybe even not having support, or even not enough information for management. For example, that's a classic problem where communicators want to communicate what's going on in the theater. However, they're just not getting access to the information, or it comes too late. They find out, for example, an hour before something, a blockbuster, a huge event is going to happen or something like that. So there's just not enough time to properly communicate that on social media. And then another hurdle is also skills. A lot of social media is about visual media. That means if you've spent your career working, for example, in communications, it means you've probably spent most of your time working on things like press releases, or how to write speeches, how to write text for the website. And then now we're talking about very different media. So it's also a question about just improving skills. Okay, so those are hurdles. And then let's also look at some messages. These are typical messages you might hear on a day-to-day basis. They really show how social media is perceived and possibly or even likely not taken seriously. For example, I'm sure some of you have heard something like, we already have someone who takes care of the tweets, posting a picture on Facebook now and then is enough, it's not important. To our audience, for example, if you look at the last sentence, the last quotation, there's still visitors who do not have mobile devices or aren't even online. That's all true. However, that does not cover your entire audience or every audience, and it's not a reason to not use social media. And this one point also about interns, we will discuss that as well later, because social media is often a skill that's at the bottom of a totem pole. Every organization has a structure, which Maren will get to in a moment, and often it's often the person in charge of social media might have the least experience at the theater, whereas the person who makes the decision about social media is at the top of the hierarchy, and they might have actually the least experience with the media. So that's a problem in day-to-day life. That's a problem that we see at many organizations, especially organizations that have a very strict hierarchy. Okay, but I want to make another point. These obstacles and hurdles, they're not just about time, they're not just about money, they're about resources and about priorities. It's really about how your organization wants to spend its time and money. Think about the example of a press release. How often do you spend months and months or a lot of time working on a press release? Whereas you might not have all that care and time invested in working on social media, for example, social only formats. So that's something to think about. Okay, we don't have time for social media, but what do we have time for? And I want to make an important point, because as communicators, it is our job to convey to management how important social media is. As I said, many organizations think that social media is just fluff. It's just about jokes on Facebook. It's not essential to the organization. However, most audiences today get most of their information on social media. And this is a reality that we need to live with. People are reading newspapers less, people tend to visit websites less. What they do is basically they assemble their own news feed on Facebook, and that is where they get their information. That's the public face of an organization. To illustrate this point, I want to look at a quote made this week from, let's say, the most famous tweeter nowadays. It's a quote about Donald Trump, and the question is, okay, how do we classify Trump's tweets? So somebody in his staff said on CNN, this is not policy. The tweets are not policy, it's social media. It's, you know, the difference. He said this, the aide said this on CNN, saying that any statement that Trump is making on a tweet has nothing to do with official policy. But intuitively, we know that that's just not true. We know that every statement an organization makes is somehow official, even a tweet. So that's why management really needs to understand that this is not superficial. It's not just the tip of the iceberg, it is the entire iceberg. It is all that most people in your audience will see. And it's all the first step into getting them to come to the theater if they're not doing so already. So now that we've discussed the role of social media, that it's, as I said, it's more than just tweets and posts, but rather should be considered an important part of the overall communication strategy. It needs to at least be coordinated with the overall strategy. So to talk about coordination and how communications, the comms and marketing departments fit into the entire theater organization, I'll hand over to Maren. Mm-hmm. Maren has years and years of experience working with theaters. So
yes, and of course every theater is structured in a completely different way, depending on the size, depending on the country, depending on the company's frame and legal basis. But you know that basically there is a certain structure, that you have an artistic director, that you have managing director, and that you of course have a quite hierarchic structure, which is actually sometimes difficult to live in, while at the same time you are a team, and theater is teamwork. So you have to always take both sides. You are in a hierarchy, but you are dependent on teamwork. So I will talk a little bit about how you get content from and interact with the other departments. So I made this little funny drawing. It's just an example, of course, of how a theater is structured. So you see here at the top of everything is the artistic director and the managing director. And then you have the head of the departments. And usually these four, which is the technical director, the head of communications, the head of drama, and the artistic management business office, they are sitting together in a weekly meeting with the artistic director and the managing director. And this is the part where the head of communication should present the overall strategy, including the social media strategy. This is also the time and the level where the head of communication can synthesize their colleagues for the importance of social media. And it would be wise really to present here now and then what you are doing on your social media channels, and to agree with your artistic and managing director on a tone, on a style, on a voice that you are with which you are speaking. Because as Amy said, it is really most important. It is the voice to the public, even more than the people at the box office, because you reach much more people, and it has a much more impact on the long run, of course, in building your image and how you are perceived by your audience, and maybe by a new audience that you want to reach. So that's why these little arrows are so bold there. The head of communication has really to interact and to give information to their directors and to their co-workers on the same level, to the head of the departments. And ideally, these head of departments talk to their co-workers and colleagues so that the information drops down in the departments. But of course, it's not enough to do that. The head of communication will not have the time to communicate all the time with all these people in all departments. So here is where the social media manager comes into place, and of course, he or she is the person who should keep the constant contact to all the people in the departments. And now the question is, how do you do that? Once you have agreed on a social media strategy and everybody is okay with it, so what do? You have started your campaigns, and you have, of course, started your Facebook accounts. You've been running that for some years, maybe. It is very good to write a style guide with the most common formats and the formats that you use on the different channels, and the kind of information and content that you are looking for. Describe what you're looking for example, photos when a new set is built, or when something unforeseen has happened. If there is in the prop department or in the makeup department, they are doing something, they're creating something that looks simply funny and is worth a photo that sharing, or something extraordinary that happens. For example, at Schaubühne, we once had a film shoot going on for a production. It was really very funny because the actors were kind of hanging out of the windows of the offices, but nobody was thinking of taking a video, kind of a making of that, or even photos. So this would have been great content to share on social media and to promote the upcoming premiere, but simply nobody thought about it, and the communication department didn't know about it. So this is a classical example of failed communication, or of not being sensitive of what could be important. Yes, make sure that that people in the departments do understand what you're looking for, what your approach to communication is, and yes, show examples of what you have really done, and send this style guide around to everybody in the theater. It really is important that everybody feels integrated in the process, because, as I said, theater is teamwork, and theater is also hierarchy, and social media is a very democratic means. So this can help to overcome these hierarchies and to feel everybody part of the process and part of the team, and being able to contribute something. So once they, I think from my experience, once they have understood what you're looking for, they will make suggestions themselves. They will send you photos. So make sure that in this style guide that you say, if you have material, if you have photos, maybe from a guest performance in China, or from something funny you saw on your way to the theater at the outside of the building, or whatever, send it to our social media manager, and make sure that you are approachable, and that you are in touch with them, and get them involved. Yes, and as I said last time already, stories and topics can be found everywhere. So with the technicians, with the colleagues from the workshops, the lighting department, and this is exactly where the backstage stories take place that you are looking for, except for the big topics that will be discussed more on the management decision makers level. But this is, yeah, going on anyway. So we're talking about these little stories as well. I would like to talk about the most important departments that you should interact with. I mean, surely you all do already, but I think it's important to stress that the graphic design and photography is they should be really good partners, and they should be really sensitized also to the topic of social media. Usually they are already. Because they are the ones who can help you shape the social media appearance to create a look and feel that fits into the overall visual and communication strategy of your theater. Then the dramaturgs, of course, because they are producing content all the time. So keep in touch with them, and also bear in mind that when it comes to texts, they might have a different taste and style than the marketing people, and even more the social media requirements, because on social media, as you know, the tone is more personal and funny and direct and interacting, and it's not so serious and academic as dramaturgs sometimes tend to write. So try to find a good mix of both worlds, and keep in close touch to the dramaturgs, because they are so close to at the production, and they have a lot of stories to share, and they have a lot of information. And the ensemble, of course, in this picture they are above everything, which is not true, of course, but in a way maybe it is true, because they are also the face of your theater, and they love to be featured. Think about how you can involve them without creating something like a yellow press storytelling feeling. But you could, for example, think of little video formats where they can tell something about themselves, their experiences, their impressions. It can be something very light and funny and easy to produce with your smartphones. It doesn't have to be expensive video shooting. For example, it could be actors on the couch, and they have to answer five questions, always the same questions, of course, to everybody, or you meet them for an espresso in the canteen, and again they have to answer 5 questions, or think of like standard formats which can be funny and interesting for the audience, because the audience wants to know about the personal life and yes, of these people that they know only from stage. This is only a short example. And also, if you have, of course, if you have actors that are also playing in films and might be quite famous, yes, it can be interesting, even more interesting, of course, to feature them. But it is, of course, a decision that you have to talk with the artistic director to, if you want to feature the films they are in, because you are talking about your theater and not about the films. But anyway, this is a spin-off effect that can be interesting. Now I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the communication department, which is, of course, also only an example. As I said, the head of communication is in charge of keeping in touch with the directors and the decision makers, but also, of course, with all the other co-workers in the department. And it, as you see, these arrows go everywhere, actually. So everybody has to communicate with everybody. And in fact, the social media manager is the one who needs to know everything, because he or she does need to know when a press release goes out, because it has to be on Facebook and Twitter as well, of course. And he or she has to know when there is a new ticket reduction, for example, in the sales and ticketing department, and has to promote that. And he or she has to know when there's a new video on the website, or press photos have been released, or yes, so there is constant interaction, of course, in this department. So the social media manager, if you have one, and it is important to have one actually, whoever it is, has to be in touch with the communication department very closely, and with the rest, as I said before, as well. So if you have an intern who is doing social media, as Amy said, these are the experts, actually. These are mostly digital natives, young people who grew up with these tools and are used to them very, very much more than some others who are much older, but in the position to make decisions. So it is extremely important to, yes, brief them thoroughly about all that's going on in the theater, about the structure and about the tone and style that you want to communicate. Because if you don't grow up as a social media manager in the theater, it is quite difficult to get all the information and get the feeling of what is going on, to find that content. So I would always suggest, if you can afford it, to have really a social media manager in your department, not somebody who is outsourced and comes in now and then, but somebody who is there almost every day and learns to grow, really grows into this whole structure and into the stories and history of the theater. So that this interaction is much easier. Yes, and now,
if I could, thank you, Mara. And if I could make one more point about that as well, it's really important to know that if you have, you might not have somebody with the title of social media manager, or you might have somebody who doesn't do it on a full-time basis. The important thing is that you have one person who is really empowered to see these other departments, to get these ideas. And then, for example, this person should be allowed to maybe even create their own vision for what the social media presence should look like. So it's really about empowering this person. Wherever they are in the hierarchy, that's not important for social media.
Exactly.
The hierarchy is basically turned on its head if we're talking about social media. Yeah, so as I said, empower the professional you have. And then interns, as Maren said, they're an excellent resource as well. So they obviously need a lot of guidance, depending on the intern and level of experience. If they are actually doing a lot of social media at your organization, they will need professional guidance from the comms team. However, they're an excellent source of ideas and inspiration. Ask them what they've seen. You never know where ideas will come from. And for social media, ideas often come from interns or maybe from unexpected places. Okay, good.
Yes.
But I think that we can then move on. We've discussed many different ideas and how you can get all this content. As we saw from Maren's charts, there's a lot of interaction within theaters, within these structures that goes into even finding the content that you need. So the question is, okay, how do we go about organizing it? Well, you do that with the editorial calendar. I'm sure that a lot of you are already using an editorial calendar. This is, I think, a standard tool in most comms departments. We want to give you a few tricks, tips and tricks to maybe ramp up the calendar in terms of social media. Now, for the first point, you obviously, I'm not sure how most of you do this on a season-to-season basis, for example, but once you have the calendar, then you can say, okay, these are the basis materials that we'll have, things like posters, we'll have a press release, we'll create a brochure. We do all these, most theaters make all these, produce all these materials for each production, and you know this in advance. The reason that that's important is that it's important from the very beginning or from an early stage to integrate ideas and formats that you can use for social content. It's also possible to create social only content. That's something people often don't understand. For example, they'll produce only a professional trailer, but that's not really, professional trailers are shared on YouTube. It's an important advertising tool, but that's not really shareable content. Even just doing a small video, for example, incorporating these formats that Maren discussed. Like you take the lead actor, you sit on the sofa, you ask him 5 questions, and you do this on Facebook Live. That would be one example, to identify a format and to actually put it in the schedule. That brings me to my next point, schedule experiments. I don't know about most of you listening, but I'm a creature of habit. I need to push myself to try something new. And social media is all about trying something new. We should really keep in mind that this is all a brand new thing. Facebook has been around since 2004. It wasn't really even popular worldwide until 2007. And now organizations are slowly catching on to how they can really use social media for themselves and for their own organizations. So this fast pace means that we need to constantly reinvent what we're doing and try something new. So my suggestion is that when you're planning an editorial calendar, that what you also do is look around, look at different formats that you'd like to try. For example, let's say you want to do a Facebook Live feature for the next premiere. Okay, that requires a bit of training first. You need to plan this. Maybe you need to get approvals. Theaters are also large organizations. You can't just suddenly do something on a whim because it seems like a good idea. No, instead, you need to plan these new formats because you probably need a lot of lead time and you probably need to convince people that you should be trying these things. But it's worth it. So as I said, schedule an experiment to push yourself. To name one example, for the lab, we always try to experiment, always try to do something new. This webinar series, for example, is a brand new thing. We're doing it for the first time, but that's good. You need to start somewhere. And often it's these small experiments, just trying something new, that end up reaping very significant results, and you don't know until you try it. Okay, but to get back to the actual editorial calendar, as I said, this is the best tool to basically organize and streamline all of the content you're producing. Another important point when you're making the editorial calendar is to determine in advance how much you want to communicate on social media. This needs to be a realistic goal. For example, Maren and I were discussing yesterday, it's like, with any goal, let's say you have a fitness goal, you say, oh, it would be great if I could go to the gym every single day. However, you need to be realistic. It's the same with social media. Maybe at the beginning you say, great, I want to have 4 tweets every day and 1 post on social media. First of all, this leads to something called blogger burnout because you just can't maintain that level of producing content every day. And second of all, it's too much for your audience. It's just too much content. So that with the editorial calendar, you can decide, okay, we'll do 2 posts weekly, or maybe 3, or maybe 1, whatever works for your organization, but put effort into those posts and don't feel pressure to post more for the sake of quantity. It's really about quality and about consistency. That's where I think the health metaphor comes in handy. Let's say that the realistic goal is that you can work to achieve health maybe 3 days a week. That's fine. The key is to be consistent. And as with Facebook and all social media, it's important to just to basically keep with it and have a steady pace, but be there for the long term. Okay, so that's, yeah, just a few tips for basically getting your editorial calendar streamlined. Now, of course, this is all, the editorial calendar is mainly relevant for things you can plan in advance. Of course, there are always many things that come up. For example, Maren had a few good examples of things, of events, or let's say social media worthy news that was basically communicated too late. So then it's too late to do something. There will always be situations where you have to react quickly to get out content. However, plan as much as you can in advance, because in daily life we all have a lot of things to do, very little time.
And also not only plan as much as you can, and if you can, produce as much you can in advance. Because as you know, you can produce a lot of posts on Facebook and then post them later at a certain date that you want. So it makes sense to sometimes, if you have a time slot and you know that you have to produce a certain content that is fixed and you have all the information already that you need, you can produce it at once and then schedule the time of the publishing just as you need it. You know that. So try to be flexible with the time, and because sometimes we simply have not the time to keep up with a editorial calendar. So we need to produce in advance, or yeah, as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just in terms of finding content, so of course you want to find content from your actual theater. However, theaters are also a member of society. So with social media, you can also interact as a member of society. But the key is to see what's going on in the world beyond you. So for that, what you can also do is say, for example, what's important to my country right now. For example, is there something going on in the art sector? Is there something that we want to comment on? This can actually be a point where a theater can really expand its wings and become a lot more even political, or move beyond the communications that it has done to date. Let's say, for example, there are elections going on. There are many elections this year. Or for example, with Brexit, with Trump. Does your theater have a point of view? Look at what's going on in the world and see if you can respond to that. And this is also something that should be in the editorial calendar. This is a point that
needs to be discussed with the directors, of course.
Exactly, this is something that is about the theater's voice. And so to have a more forceful voice, you need to have these discussions early on. Because when something happens in the news, it's often very difficult to react to it right away with a good post. However, if you do this ahead of time, or have a mechanism in place to get approvals last minute, then it's possible to do this. Let's say you have, there is an example where somebody gives a speech at European Parliament saying we should cut arts funding. This is not important for society. Well, you as a theater, do you have an opinion about that? Or do you want to say nothing? That's a choice. So that's a good opportunity to basically think about these wider things going on. Now, with the political examples, those are much more serious examples. However, there are also even easier examples. For example, whenever I make an editorial calendar, I also just look at what kind of days are going on. For example, on Wikipedia, you can find always a list of international days. For example, today is International Day of Theater or International Day of Children, World Children's Day. Maybe you see something like that. What could you do? Okay, today's World Children's Day. Okay, we know that that's happening in 2 months. Okay, we get what we could do is take maybe a childhood photograph of the lead actor, and then what does he do? He says, okay, as a child, I was inspired to become an actor for the first time when I was 5 years old, and so on. So then they can use this basically sort of boring event. It's not boring, but it's just something that happens every day. Every day there's some kind of World Day of this or World Day of that. But see what's relevant for your theater. Use it as an opportunity, because that's another way to engage with things going on in the world. So find these examples and then see how it applies to your theater. Okay, and as we've discussed, you have an editorial calendar. Hopefully you've already established the voice, or as with the issue of voice on social media, it's often a work in progress. So you're working on establishing a stronger voice if you haven't quite gotten there yet. And now the question is, okay, the audience knows what to expect. How do we prevent boredom? Not only for ourselves, but for the audience too. So we'll ask Popeye, how do we mix it up? So we have a few recommendations, a few tools for mixing it up. The first is a takeover. As you know, this is a format you've probably seen on social media where an external person will basically take over your account. So it's clearly communicated. For example, let's say there's a guest artist in town for the upcoming production. Okay, what you can do in advance is work with the person, invite them to take over the accounts. Of course, you will work closely to coordinate with that person, but you can really benefit from having a different point of view. Artists, and maybe let's say people who aren't social media managers or comms people, they probably have a much different way of going about social media. And if you make it clear that this is a takeover of your account, it's an opportunity to really try out something new, to feature other people, to make things a bit more interesting. That's also a similar point with content curation. I just want to briefly explain what that is. There's content curation, and then there's also content creation. Content creation is very self-explanatory. That's what we all do. We create content and then we share it. However, content curation means that you find relevant content that somehow aligns with your maybe point of view or with your organization or something that you want to share. This is what we, in everyday life, what we call retweeting or sharing on Facebook. But comms people call this content curation. It's also a very helpful way to find your community. For example, for the lab, what we did was we identified people who are working in similar areas of arts and technology. So you find these key people, and then they probably have interesting content, and we want to share that with our own audience. Now, just one quick point, it's not about just sharing and retweeting. It's also about maybe adding your own analysis or commentary. That makes it much more effective, and it shows that you are also basically demonstrating leadership in this one area. So we think it's a very helpful tool to make your organization stand out. Okay, we can discuss that during the questions more in depth if you'd like. And then the final point is to just surprise your audience. As I said, once they get to know what you're like on social media, you already have your personality, they know how often you post, for example. Surprise them. You can best do this with takeovers or strange point of views. Here's one example. Maybe you know this picture. This is the monkey selfie. I'll just give a brief, brief explanation of that. Basically, a British nature photographer left his camera equipment with this group of monkeys to see how they were to react. So this is basically how a monkey saw themselves and took their own selfie. So the thing that you can see, I mean, this picture was seen all over the world. What you see is, okay, this is actually the monkey's point of view. It's their perspective. People like to see a very different or unusual perspective. Let's say, for example, you do have a visiting artist. Let's say it's somebody who's very, very radical. They have a very, very unique point of view. let them show that on social media. You don't need to cover that or hide it. It's really, that's a good way to get really striking, fascinating material. Or for example, let's say you have children in a production, give them a smartphone, let them take pictures. And then we can see, okay, the child's point of view. It might be very different than how an adult would take pictures. So in any case, yeah, basically with all these different formats and ideas, we want to give you some inspiration so that you see, yeah, not only what we can do, but how you can do it on a daily basis with a plan. Okay, and now we'll go to the next few topics. In terms of time, we'll go through the next few slides fairly quickly. Of course, if any of you have any further questions or need more in-depth information, we're happy to discuss these things more in depth. But yeah, community management, I think we all know what that is. It means basically if you are on Facebook and in charge of your social media channels, then you know basically, okay, who is your audience? How are we interacting with them? It's generally a good idea to have guidelines in place. How fast do we want to reply? What kind of community do we want to build? Who do we want as followers? How much interaction do we want? This first point is also very important. Facebook and social media, but Facebook especially is really about dialogue. So this is a question also related to time. Do you have enough time to devote to community management? This needs to be an honest assessment because you can really foster or prevent dialogue quite easily. At this point, most people have mastered the monologue aspect of just posting. Maybe something like, you know, check out our premiere. But the next step is about fostering dialogue, asking questions, being provocative. Let's say there's something going on, for example, the latest production has caused a scandal in your community. How will you be equipped to discuss that on social media? Do you want social media to be a place for dialogue on these topics? It's important to determine that ahead of time because that brings me to my last point. Once in a while on social media, there can be a crisis. Let's say, for example, you're putting on a production in a very conservative country. This is a reality, and let's say you've offended maybe a religious group or a political group, and now you're dealing with lots and lots of possibly even illegal comments on Facebook. You need to definitely have a crisis plan in place so that you can quickly react to this kind of event. That's very important. As I said, crisis communications is not something that we can fully go into depth today. However, on social media, as I said, it is possible to sort of guide the amount of dialogue based on how much you're, let's say, intentionally fostering it or not. Okay. Yeah, and just briefly, there are a few kinds of organizations that are doing just an amazing job at community management. As I mentioned, most organizations on Facebook are now basically doing one-way communications where they post and maybe like a comment, but maybe they ignore comments or they don't really engage in dialogue with people who leave comments. However, some organizations are leading the way, like newspapers and also governmental organizations. I've seen this shift over the past few years. For example, in Germany, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, many of the ministries and governmental organizations were not even on social media and they didn't think it was important. However, now it is being recognized as a vital tool to communicate with citizens. So the whole idea of the role of social media has changed for these organizations. So that's another question that the theater world should ask itself. Okay, is this a place to engage with our audience? It's a perfectly good question, and the answer sometimes takes a long time to work out. To name the example of ministries, there's a ministry in Germany, I won't mention the name, but they recently, they're always in the news, and they, I recently went to a speech given by somebody from the organization, and they said that they needed 4 years to launch Facebook, from the initial idea to actually launching it. However, it's now really one of the best ministries around in terms of fostering dialogue. They have really heated debates. It's really a place where German society debates. So that's so they are doing good work, but it took a long time to get there and a lot of planning. So that's why it's important to at least recognize what the concept is. If your organization wants to really use these tools for dialogue, that needs to be determined. If they want to keep it at the monologue level or with minimal interaction, that needs to be a conscious decision. Okay, good. And now I'll go to the next topic, which Maren already briefly mentioned. As we said, we want everyone to participate. Social media can be sometimes, let's say, a bottomless pit. We need more and more content. And so basically, you want to show as many sides of the theater as possible, not just the stage, but backstage. How do things happen behind the scenes? This kind of information is really interesting to audiences. However, you want to encourage everyone to participate, but they need guidance from you. Think about maybe even holding a workshop. Definitely create guidelines for content so that they know, for example, okay, if they send you a picture Friday night at 11, and then they say, okay, where's the post? And you say, well, I'm back in the office on Monday. Okay, how do you deal with that kind of situation? That's a kind of conflict situation that can happen on a day-to-day basis. So people need to know what the guidelines are, just to make sure that these things, that social media not just reflects the theater, but also is professional. That's our job as communicators, to be the gatekeepers, to make sure that we maintain quality. Okay, and then just briefly, as I said, on social media, you can always do more. The question is, okay, you will never have more, it's unlikely that you'll have more time, but there are tools that help you use your time, especially as you have many different channels and a larger team. There are tools basically called social media management tools. Hootsuite is the most common example. Trust me, I don't work for the company. I'm just telling you that that it's a very good standard tool, especially in larger organizations. But there are many other tools out there. So just if you're interested in using that, just do a bit of research, find the one that works for you. What most of these tools have is one dashboard where basically you have an overview of all the accounts. That helps you to do scheduled posts. And to ensure that many different people, let's say your comms team, can access the accounts. It's basically, if you have a smaller organization and you're posting on Facebook just once or twice a week or something like that, at a manageable level, you probably don't need it. But as the presence expands and gets more complicated, or the team grows, it's sooner or later you'll need one of these tools. For example, in terms of time, with scheduled posts, it's great. Basically, you can just sit down, let's say once a week or once a month, and just basically get all the posts done that you want. That just saves time. And then one other important feature of these tools is tracking. So basically, you get an alert if there's some kind of, if you get a lot of negative commentaries right away. This is also an important thing, as I said, related to the crisis communications aspect, that you can find out about problems as soon as they arise and then take care of them. Great. Okay, and now we'll go to briefly to a few best practice examples. And one of my favorite examples is New York City Ballet. They joined YouTube in 2008. They were one of the very first cultural organizations to do that. I will briefly go to the site to just show it real quickly. One moment. And now we're back. Hello. Hello. We will, disappear in a moment. Yeah, just to show you the New York City Ballet site. Pardon my computer, everything's in German. But as you can see, okay, here we're on their page. Everything's sorted by views, so how often things have been viewed. If you notice, a lot of videos that are still viewed and have the highest amount of views are really old. Here there's a view when we were kids, New York City Ballet dancers as kids. It's 8 years old. A special on point shoes, it's 7 years old. So a lot of this content yes, it's not new, but it's good content. People still want to watch. It's still out there. And so I'm using this example to show that there were some, that basically New York City Ballet recognized the potential of YouTube as a medium for a cultural organization very early in the game. At the time, it seemed a bit strange. Okay, why are they using YouTube? It's just a place for silly videos. It's not for artistic content at all, but they recognized that. And so now, almost 10 years later, they've really come a long way. And now I will go back to the presentation. One moment. Here we are again. Again, we are playing screens. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, and we also discussed last time, if you're only joining us today, last time we discussed Snapchat as well. And LA County Museum of Arts has recognized Snapchat as a way to be very, very, basically to use classical art to be extremely modern and to show off the personality of the organization. And they've been recognized for this, and they were also one of the first organizations to recognize this potential to reach new audiences. Good. Now, we don't have too much time, but yeah, now we want to discuss with you. As you can see, there's a little chat window. If you have any questions, please tell us your questions. But one thing that Maren and I have discussed throughout our discussions for planning the lab and today's webinar is basically the role of theater in society. Because there's society and then there's social media. And one thing that we've noticed is that what happens on the stage is often very radical, and the theater is often used as a site of resistance in society. So theater conceives its role as being very powerful and political, and the question is, okay, do we see any of this on social media or not? Do any of you have any thoughts, or what do you think, Maren?
So far, I have not seen actually one theater that is really using social media as a platform for discussion so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from my experience that it is very difficult because, of course, you, as a theater, you are a cultural institution and often you get public funding. And of course, you have to be careful with what you are doing on stage. Everything is possible because it's art. But as soon as you leave the stage, things are getting more complicated, also legally, I think. So maybe this is the reason why social media channels are not used as really places of where debate can go on, or where you can be provocative. However, I think, as you said, we should encourage theaters to enhance the dialogue and to not monologuize so much
Yeah.
on social media channels. But it would be great to have your ideas and thoughts about that, and also your questions about all that we have talked about today. So give us a short message on the right-hand side of your window, and we will be happy to discuss with you.
And I also want to make another point. My observation is that organizations who have a strong voice or a very strong social media presence have built that up over time.
Yes, it takes time.
It takes time, but often there's one person who has a vision. It's not necessarily about having a big team or a lot of money. It's about having one main vision. And often you see that there's this one person who really has a vision, and then the team comes later. The money comes later. I want to show one example. It's also an unexpected example. One moment, here we are again. So in America, we have a very a boring dictionary. Our dictionary is called the Merriam-Webster. Anyway, so who would expect that a dictionary is doing great, really thought-provoking work on social media? It's very unexpected. Here's an article you can see from BuzzFeed, which talked about, okay, 14 times the dictionary was shady. I won't say the last two initials, possibly you know what that means already. So what they started doing is what they did is they recognized that we live in a post-factual society. People are talking about things like fake news all the time, basically. So they decided, okay, we're the dictionary. We at least know what words mean. So for example, in this case, Trump basically, in one of his tweets, there was a spelling error. Instead of saying unprecedented, he said unprecedented. So it's not a real word. So what did Merriam-Webster do? Very quickly, they replied and then said, the word of the day is not unprecedented. You don't know that word. That's a, yeah, so basically they replied to this spelling error right away saying, okay, it's not a word. And what did they do? They post the definition of huh. So question saying, huh, what does that mean? That's how they replied. Now that is just great. It was fast. They provided truth, or the feeling of truth and certainty to their audience. So it was very important that they did that. And I'd say a dictionary is the least expected place. However, they had one person who recognized, okay, we can do a lot. And they seized the moment to become actually extremely influential. So our message is also that we can, that there's no reason that theaters can't take on this role.
Absolutely. So I think it needs one person who really has a feeling for that, and to really very quickly says, oh, well, let's react in this and that way. And there has to, of course, be the confidence from the director's side that this person is has the power and is empowered to really react quickly without getting feedback from them before, because it has to happen very quickly. So I think there has to be a general agreement on how do we want our social media person to chat and to react, and there must be trust, of course, and a very sensitive feeling of what is suitable and what not. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's really a long process.
Yeah.
This is new for everybody. So the daily business of comms and marketing has basically been the same for, let's say, years and years. We have a production, we do a press release, now we have site, we have text and visuals for the website, and social media is a whole new thing. So that's why you shouldn't get discouraged if you get all these negative comments. You have to basically push back and show people that it is important, it is worthwhile, and if people don't believe you, then see if you can just try it. Have this freedom to experiment, and also to develop your vision for social media. Because as you can see from these examples, it does take bravery. It does take a lot of courage to set out this vision, and to have all these ideas, but to actually execute them in daily life. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just keep experimenting. That's also one reason why the lab is here, to see if we can bring some of the artistry from the creative artistic works actually into social media. That, I think, is the real challenge as we go forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we would love to continue the dialogue.
Yes.
After today. As we said, today is our very last webinar. We've had 3 so far, and so over this 4-month period, we've gone over a lot of content with everyone. Now we really want to stay with you and help you, give you advice whenever we can.
Yeah.
If you ever need advice, need ideas, even just want feedback, feel free to get in touch with both of us whenever you'd like. This is something we're very passionate about. And on a personal note, it's new for us too. We're all still learning. We're sitting here as the experts. Yeah. However, expertise means, let's say you've been on Snapchat for 2 years. That's expertise. This is all relative. So we're all learning and experimenting. So don't feel discouraged or that everyone else has made more progress, because it's not true.
Absolutely, and it's always about trial and error and finding your own way of doing it. And every project and every company and every theater is different. So there are no patterns that work for everybody.
That's right. And that's really the idea, is that it doesn't work for everybody. It should work for you. It
Right.
should work for your own theater.
Yeah,
and so we
absolutely.
have this uniquely recognizable voice that everyone knows belongs to your theater. It's a tough goal. As we said, it's a work in progress.
But you have to start somewhere. I mean,
exactly.
and wherever you are in your social media management, you can go from there and go further. Yeah.
Exactly. We've already made really great strides. As we said, most theaters are already, of course, on social media. We've mastered the first step in terms of monologue or some of the sort of one-sided communication. And now the question is, okay, we need to all get to the next level and basically show leadership and be a pioneer. So
good luck.
So we wish you all luck. And yes. As we said, we're happy to discuss that.
Yes.
And we're so happy you could join us today. And if you've joined the other webinars as well, thank you very much. And what we'll do is also edit the videos, and then you can find them again online if you need to go review some of the material. And if you want to go into a few more topics more in depth, then just get in touch.
Yeah, let us know. You probably have all my email address, or if not, you can visit the European Theatre Lab .eu website and get in touch there. So yes, we will be there for you.
Exactly.
And hope to interact.
We're here. Yeah. Great.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.
Goodbye.
Thank you.